We throw the word environment around a lot, right? But do we actually know the rules that run the whole show? Well, it turns out that from a little garden in your backyard to the entire planet, there's kind of like a user's guide for how life works. So let's crack it open and see what the rules are.
Okay, this might sound a little like sci-fi, but what if I told you that you could? And all it takes is understanding a few key principles. Just picture a sealed aquarium. What would it need really to survive completely on its own forever? If you can answer that, you're already on your way to understanding how all life on Earth actually works.
Right, so to get our heads around the really big stuff, we're going to start small. We're talking about this idea of a self-contained world. Literally, a world in a jar. This will help us build up to the global scale, piece by piece. And that world in a jar has a name, of course. It's called an ecosystem. And the key word there is interacting. It's not just the living things, it's also everything they depend on and connect with. A forest, a pond, even that little park down the street. It's all about the connections. So every single ecosystem is basically made of two different kinds of parts. First, you've got the biotic components. That's all the living players, the plants, the animals, the tiny microorganisms. Then you've got the abiotic components. That's the stage they all play on. Stuff like the temperature, how much it rains, and the dirt under their feet. And you absolutely need both. They're totally dependent on each other. Okay, so if we zoom in on the living parts, the biotic stuff, you'll find there are three main jobs that need doing. First up, you've got the producers. These are guys like green plants, who are brilliant enough to make their own food just using sunlight. Then you have the consumers, who get their energy by, well, consuming other things. And finally, you have the decomposers. This is the all-important cleanup crew like bacteria and fungi who break everything down and recycle it all back into the system. All right, we've met the cast of characters. Now, what's the story? The plot is all about how energy moves through this system. And it's not random at all. It follows a really strict universal rule that basically shapes all of life as we know it. This pathway has a simple name we all know: a food chain. It's a super straightforward linear series of who eats whom. It's simple, right? Grass gets eaten by a goat, and that goat might then be eaten by a person. That chain is the exact route that energy takes as it flows from one organism to the next. But, and this is the crucial part, here's where things get wild. Not all of the energy makes it up to the next level. Get this, only about 10% of the energy from one organism is actually stored and passed on when it gets eaten. Just 10%. And this chart just lays it all out clear as day. Look at that massive drop-off. If the producers at the bottom start with 100% of the energy, the primary consumers that eat them only get about 10% of that. And the secondary consumers that eat them, they're left with just 1%. That means a whopping 90% of the energy just vanishes at every single step, mostly just lost as heat. And that right there is why you never see these super long 10-step food chains out in the wild. The math just doesn't add up. After just 3 or 4 links in the chain, there's simply not enough energy left to support another level of life. There's just not enough gas in the tank to keep it going. Okay, so the system for energy seems pretty clear. But what happens when we throw a wrench in the works? What if something gets in there that isn't supposed to be? Something man-made and potentially harmful that gets into this natural flow. This is where we get into something called biological magnification, and it's the total opposite of how energy works. Remember how energy goes down at each step? Well, certain chemicals that don't break down, they actually go up. They get more and more concentrated the higher up the food chain you go. So let's follow a pesticide to see how this works.
Say it washes off a farm and ends up in a lake in really low amounts. The little aquatic plants, they absorb a tiny bit of it. But then a single fish comes along and eats many of those plants, and that chemical starts to build up in its body. Finally, a person might eat a few of those fish over time, and they end up with the highest, most concentrated, and most dangerous dose of all.
And this right here is why this should really get your attention. Because let's face it, we're usually at the very top of these food chains. And that means we are the ones who can end up with the maximum concentration of these chemicals accumulated in our own bodies. The stuff we put out there can come right back to us.
All right, so let's zoom way out now, from the local food chain to the whole planet. Because our activities aren't just messing with things on a small scale, we're creating some massive global challenges. Let's look at two big ones. First up, problem number 1. We've got a hole in our shield. The Earth's protective shield, that is. I'm talking about the ozone layer. And yeah, it's absolutely crucial for life. It's this layer of gas way up in the atmosphere that blocks most of the sun's dangerous ultraviolet, or UV radiation. That's the stuff that can cause things like skin cancer. So you can think of it as the Earth's built-in heavy-duty sunscreen. So back in the 80s, scientists started freaking out because this shield was getting dangerously thin, and they traced the cause back to these man-made chemicals called CFCs, which were in everything from refrigerants to spray cans. But here's the amazing part. The world actually listened. In 1987, the UN got countries to agree to stop making these things, and it just shows that when we work together on these huge problems, we can actually make a difference.
Okay, on to the second big planetary headache, and this is one you and I deal with every single day, our garbage problem. The incredible amount of trash we make, and the question of, where does it all go?
So all our trash basically fits into one of two buckets. You've got your biodegradable stuff, like food scraps or paper. Nature's cleanup crew, those decomposers, can handle that. But then you have the non-biodegradable stuff, like plastics, glass, and metals. They can't break those down. They just stick around for a long, long time. So, why not? Why can't nature just break down a plastic bottle? Well, it all comes down to these things called enzymes. The bacteria and fungi have very specific enzymes for very specific jobs, like keys for locks. It's like they have the key for an apple core, but our man-made plastics use a completely different lock. They just don't have the right key. So the plastic just sits there.
Wow. Okay. We've gone from a tiny world in a jar all the way to the entire planet, from how energy flows to why plastic sticks around forever. So what's the bottom line here? What's the main takeaway from this user's guide? Okay, let's boil it down. Number 1, everything in an ecosystem is connected. You can't change one thing without affecting something else. 2, that flow of energy is a one-way street and it's super inefficient, losing 90% at every step. 3, what we do as humans can throw a huge wrench into these natural systems and on a global scale. And finally, 4, the stuff we make, especially plastic, can stick around forever because nature just doesn't know what to do with it. And that really leaves us with one final, kind of haunting question. We learned about producers, consumers, and decomposers. But in this whole system, what eats our plastic? What consumes our garbage? The scary answer is nothing. It just builds up. And that's something we really need to think about.